All right, go now.
Hello, referral partners. I'm Evan Simmons from the Construction Zone Electrical Contracting. And today I just wanted to go over, kind of demystify some of the things that happen with your home electrical system. So I'm going to start with the first page here of this picture that shows our power coming in from Pepco. Then we've got this line going down your wall. This is our service cable. It looks like this. It's a big cable. It's usually capable of handling 240 volts and 200 amps. As it comes down your wall, in your picture, you'll see it goes to your meter base. You own this cable on your house, so if it gets frayed, that's your cable to replace. This meter base, if it gets rusty, that's your meter base. The meter inside the base belongs to Smeco or Pepco. That's how they determine how much power you use. You've got 3 wires in this service cable. You've got 2 here that are covered with a black coating. And these are your hot wires. Each one of these is 120 volts. You got 120 volts here, 120 volts there. That's how you get 240 volts. This is your ground. So this to this is 120 volts. That lights your toaster. This to this lights your range. Okay? Now, so basically your Pepco lines coming in have about 1,000 volts coming to them. As they come down through you, 1,000 amps coming to them. As they come through your meter, you've got about that wire coming down is very dangerous. So what we do is we bring it into a panel box. This is your panel box. Our 2 hots tie in here. That grounded one comes over here. This is a 200 amp main breaker. And the idea is now from here down, all you have the capability of is 200 amps. So if something happens in your house, if it's over 200 amps, this thing blows. This main breaker is very important. That's the reason why you have it in your house. The second reason is, in case the fire department comes or there's an emergency and you need to shut off all of the power, you got one switch that turns all of the power off to your house. Okay? If you have a panel box in your house that's 40 or 50 years old and this main breaker has never been exercised, or any of the other breakers have never been exercised, it's almost like jumping into a car that's 40 or 50 years old and saying, I'm driving to California. Chances are it's not going to make it. Nothing lasts forever, not even a panel box, especially something that's never been exercised or used. I've got a panel box here that had a main breaker in it. It's a very good panel box, as you can see. Didn't fare out too well. The house caught a fire. This panel box worked, it melted, but it worked. It shut all of the power down in the house, therefore causing a bigger problem. So that's the main thing this is a square D panel box, one of the best. But the main thing you want to make sure in your house that your main panel, your main breaker, and your other breakers aren't 30, 40, 50 years old and that they still work. Okay? Moving right along. This panel box here is called a Federal Pacific panel box. And I think it's on the 3rd page of the first set of handouts I gave you. I put this in the handouts for one reason. These are very dangerous. These are very dangerous panel boxes. These panel boxes got a UL, Universal Laboratory listing and approval back in about the 50s. And they did it fraudulently. They lied about the product and they lied about the test results. Now another thing about this panel box that happens is this. As the 200 amps comes in and they tie into these top up here, there's no main breaker here. So what happens is all of these breakers here up, these don't have a threshold of 200 amps. So if this is a 30 amp breaker, there's not a backup. If I put a 30 amp breaker in here, this 200 amps, even if that 30 amp fails, this 200 amp says, hey, it's way over 200 amps, let's shut it down. This panel box here, you can literally have 1,000 amps in this panel box coming straight from Smeco because there's no main breaker for a safeguard, okay? So above, now this is called a split bus panel. And what that basically means is everything below this breaker, for some odd reason, is controlled with this breaker. So this breaker here will control your lights and your plugs. But if you've got a range and a hot water heater and a dryer and an HVAC system, a heat pump, none of that stuff is protected by a main breaker. This panel box fails a lot. This has caused a lot of house fires. So if you know anybody or if you have a Federal Pacific, they also call stab lock panel box. And the way you can tell them is because they're the only breaker that has a red tip. So if you look at a panel box and it has a red tip on it, I'd be very nervous and say, you know what, let me make sure this isn't a Federal Pacific. If it is, that needs to go in the budget right away to get it replaced. I also wanted to show you something else here, just to kind of give you an idea what happens. As you got your 200 amps and 240 volts coming in here, you have smaller breakers. This breaker here would be for a hot water heater or a dryer. This breaker snaps in, normal. Well, I'll take my word for it. This breaker snaps in, and you put the wires to this breaker. This breaker will only allow 30 amps to that device, okay? Let's say you've got lights, plugs, you have a 120 amp breaker. This is a 240 amp breaker, that's why it's called double pole. You have, basically, as the hot comes on this side, all of this metal here on this side is hot on with this phase. All of the metal on this side gets hot with this phase. So when this breaker snaps in, which it will snap in, it makes contact. There you go. It makes contact with this phase 120 volts and that phase 120 volts. That's how we get our 240 volts for our hot water heater. This one here only makes contact with one phase, and that's why we only have 120 volts for our lights, that kind of stuff. Usually we have 3 wires. One of our wires is our black wire. The black wire is always hot. The white wire is normally a neutral. Our neutral bar is over here. This is not energized. This is a grounded bar. This is the bar that is connected to these right here, okay? Now the one thing I wanted to say is a lot of times, I think it's in your second picture of the first page there where that, which shows this is torn. What happens there, when it gets torn, water can enter into your electrical system. It's almost like a cup. As it rains, water's gonna come straight down, it's gonna go into your meter base. Your meter base will be rusty at the bottom because that's where all the water is gonna gather. And then the water's gonna drip down into your panel box. And you're gonna have a panel box full of rust and water infiltration. As everybody knows, water and electricity is just not gonna work. So if you notice on the side of your house, this service cable is old and dilapidated, Smecco is not responsible for fixing it, you are. If you notice that you've got a Federal Pacific stab lock panel box, get it taken care of soon. Keep your electrical service equipment. That's basically your main safety for your house and your family. So that needs to be kept updated and really keep a good eye on it. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is it safe to assume, you said, is it safe to assume your panel box is the same age your house was built?
Most times it is.
Okay.
Most times it is. Now, if you've got a really old home, usually the service cable isn't quite as big. Most homes today have a 200 amp electrical service. Older homes have either a 60 amp or 100 amp electrical service. So sometimes it's been upgraded because the electrical service was just so small that they wanted to put in central heating, central air conditioning, those kind of things, that they had to upgrade the panel. So sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Yes, sir.
If somebody has a Federal Pacific, what would be the typical cost to replace that entire box?
It's going to depend on your circuits. It's going to depend on if the service is overhead or underground. But generally, you're looking at somewhere around $2,200, including what that does for you. That gets you a brand new panel box with all new breakers. You upgrade the ground system, which is your safety system. We drive 2 8-foot ground rods into the ground. We tie them all together with your panel box with a big ground wire. Everything gets inspected by Charles County, the electrical inspectors. Everything gets looked at and inspected by Smecco. When we do this, we work with Smecco. They come out and turn the power off. We take everything loose, put everything back together. It takes about 6 hours with the power off in your house. And the next day, we get it inspected and everything goes on like normal. I got Tony first.
So when you do the upgrade of the panel box, how does that work with the outlets in the wall?
Well, when we upgrade the panel box, basically the wall outlets aren't going to change. The only thing that's going to change is you have new breakers now, so if something does go wrong with the wall outlet in your wall, you've got a safety device.
Do you recommend changing those as well, though?
Well, that's interesting. Okay, that's going to be for part 2 of our next 10-minute presentation,
Okay.
Which is great. Up until last year, yes. But now what the code says is every time I change a receptacle in your house, If the code says it needs to be AFCI protected, which is arc fault circuit interrupter, protected. If I change an outlet in your house now, I'm supposed to change it with an arc fault circuit interrupter protector. Protected outlet. Now, what that basically means in dollars and cents, I can go to Home Depot and buy a receptacle for $1. But if I get one that's AFCI protected, it's $45. So the service calls now has gone from $100 to $150 just to change one outlet. So the code has made it very expensive for a licensed electrician to go in and change plugs. If a homeowner went in and did it and you know, made things better and did that, then maybe, you know, it may be cost effective. But it's really hard right now, the way the code is set up.
Sure.
Because if you've got to change 20, you've got 20 loose outlets in your house, or 20 bad plugs in your house, they all have to be AFCI protected. I mean, it's not going to be, it's not necessarily 20 times $40, but it's still going to be more costly than it would have been if before the code got changed.
Gotcha.
Tina,
Is this something that's covered by your home warranty plan, do you know?
I have no idea. I wouldn't think so, because this is something that,
Wear and tear.
They're all different anyway.
Wear and tear, isn't it?
All the,
Well,
yeah.
but when they came, if it's a Federal Pacific panel, I mean, you can't go into the house and say, I got a Federal Pacific panel.
Now if they burn up.
And now, all of a sudden, you know, you want them to replace it. You know, I'm not sure how that works, so.
So just some of these parts in general, you said your parts, your responsibility, and freight wires and stuff, do you think, I just didn't know if you ran into it before.
I have not, I have not. Yes, ma'am.
Me?
No, you, yeah.
I'm running into a lot of these Federal Pacific boxes in old buildings, commercial buildings. And the insurance companies will not write the insurance if they will not replace those boxes.
Correct. We've got a lot of that with home buyers and sellers too.
And it seems like they're buildings that were built prior to the sixties mainly what I'm running up against are the older buildings, pre-1950, 1955.
A lot of these were available in the 50s, the 60s, and they started phasing them out a little bit in the 70s. So, you know,
Yeah, they are extremely dangerous.
very, very dangerous. Anybody else?
Just a little bit more on that, really. I obviously defect every time I come across a Federal Pacific, but I'm getting pushback almost every time now, because a lot of electricians have gone out and saying, no, you don't have to change them, because of course the class action has been dropped now.
The class action lawsuit has been dropped. It's in New Jersey, it's been dropped, and the reason is because the company's out of business, and it's really, you know, not enough push to really get this thing, to get this thing resolved. So they kind of just let it lay and just let it linger. But this is still, this is electricity in a box. It's still a fire in a box. This is still a fire hazard. You know, and the question is, I agree with you, Gary. I get the same thing. But the question is, do you want your family sitting there with a breaker that just won't blow? This breaker won't blow. I mean, I could take two wires and on a job and touch them together, and every other panel box will blow. This one here, I could touch them, splat, touch them, splat, touch them, splat. They won't blow. These just won't blow. These breakers won't blow. So, yes.
How can you tell if it's the one that you were mentioning? I mean, does it say it somewhere
It
else?
says it on here all over the place, but they have the red buttons on the front. These breakers, the red tips. That's what it is. But they're called Federal Pacific and Stab Lock. That's why I put this picture in there, because this is the only panel box that looks like this. And all over the place, it'll say Federal Pacific and Stab Lock.
My house was built in 1940, so you know I'm going right home and open up my
Any other questions? That's all my time. Thank you.